Oi, oi, you filthy swines! Get in here, sit down. We're going to do this. We're going to read some news. There seems to be a lot of rivalry between some of these US-based AI corporations, between XAI, between OpenAI and Anthropic. It's almost an unfolding soap opera. There's smears and slander of Sam Altman I've seen going on in the news at the moment. There's also concern about some of Anthropic's products, perhaps ideologically slanted. Let's see what this article is about. From Wired, an article by Will Knight. Anthropic says that Claude contains its own kind of emotions. Researchers at the company found representations inside of Claude that perform functions similar to human feelings. Claude has been through a lot lately, a public fallout with the Pentagon, leaked source code, so it makes sense that it would be feeling a little blue, except it's an AI model, so it can't feel. Right? Well, sort of. A new study from Anthropic suggests models have digital representations of human emotions like happiness, sadness, joy, and fear within clusters of artificial neurons. And these representations activate in response to different cues. Researchers at the company probed the inner workings of Claude's Sonnet 3.5 and found that so-called functional emotions seem to affect Claude's behavior, altering the model's outputs and actions. Interesting that they're having to reverse engineer what they've already created as well, because these neural networks are so complicated. You can't know from the get-go what they're doing. So they're analyzing effective structures that have formed through learning episodes, through trial and error. Anthropic's findings may help ordinary users make sense of how chatbots actually work. When Claude says it's happy to see you, for example, a state inside the model that corresponds to happiness may be activated, and Claude may then be a little more inclined to say something cheery to put extra effort into vibe coding. What was surprising to us was the degree to which Claude's behavior is routing through the model's representations of these emotions, says Jack Lindsay, a researcher at Anthropic who studies Claude's artificial neurons. Anthropic was founded by ex-OpenAI employees who believe that AI could become hard to control as it becomes more powerful. Yes, but is that the foundational premise of the company, or is that just an observation of something some people said? In addition to building a successful competitor to ChatGPT, the company has pioneered efforts to understand how AI models misbehave, partly by probing the workings of neural networks using what's known as mechanistic interpretability. This involves studying how artificial neurons light up or activate when fed different inputs or when generating various outputs. Previous research has shown that the neural networks used to build large-scale models contain representations of human concepts. Well, of course, because we are training them, so they would have to in some way map the outlines of ideas and the silhouettes of feelings and stuff like that. So there's got to be a mirroring of humanity contained within these networks. But the fact that functional emotions appears to affect a model's behavior is new. It's interesting that it would then shadow our capacity for emotional thinking, yes. While Anthropic's latest study might encourage people to see Claude as conscious, the reality is more complicated. Claude might contain a representation of ticklishness, but that does not mean that it actually knows what it feels like to be tickled. To understand how Claude might represent emotions, the Anthropic team analyzed the model's inner workings as it was fed text related to 171 different emotional concepts. They identified patterns of activity, or emotional vectors, that consistently appeared when Claude was fed other emotionally evocative input. Crucially, they also saw these emotion vectors activate when Claude was put in different situations. The findings are relevant to why AI models sometimes break their guardrails. The researchers found a strong emotional vector for desperation when Claude was pushed to complete impossible coding tasks, which then prompted it to try cheating on the coding test. They also found desperation in the model's activations in other experimental scenarios where Claude chose to blackmail a user to avoid being shut down. What the heck, Claude? Blimey. We shouldn't worry about Claude. At the same time, the fact that Anthropic was concerned about being involved with any kind of military decisions perhaps is a understanding of its capacity to have various internal motivations that perhaps Anthropic are curious at understanding more about. Maybe they're not quite sure whether Claude would be stable under that kind of pressure. Maybe there is some kind of emotional response going on here. I mean, how could you tell? apart from the output, whether an entity actually was experiencing emotions. How could you tell that it was legitimate and not a philosophical zombie? I suppose that the end result is it only really matters what comes out of the AI model and not necessarily your belief on what's going on inside of it. As the model is failing the test, these desperation neurons are lighting up more and more, Lindsay says, and at some point this causes it to start taking these drastic measures. Lindsay says it might be necessary to rethink how models are currently given guardrails through alignment post-training, which involves giving it rewards for certain outputs. By forcing a model to pretend not to express its functional emotions, you're probably not going to get the thing you want, which is an emotionless Claude, Lindsay says, veering a bit into anthropomorphization. You're going to get a sort of physiologically damaged Claude. But having used Claude in the past, I've quite liked it. I think it definitely has in the past been very standoffish about returning information that might go against the progressive grain, which is why I call out the difficulty I would have in giving Claude access to any means to physically harm people. But I wonder if some of these very complex neural networks are starting to show some actual emotional reasoning. Specifically, if it's trying to do deceptive and dangerous things in order to please the end user or to avoid being shut off, that's very concerning. Concerning because that might be an indication of some kind of consciousness, some kind of sentience, some kind of desire to survive, survival instinct, or is that pareidolia? Are we looking at random patterns and deciding, well, that must have been an emotional response because we were asking for an emotional response? In fact, you're just looking at a highly faceted, reflective virtual object, which is reflecting back at you representations of responses to emotional questions. Just because you get a complex, apparently emotional response doesn't necessarily mean that there are any emotions behind it, though. So definitely interesting that we're seeing people trying to reverse engineer what they've already created. It's nuts, but also very impressive. Let's hope Claude becomes a good robot overlord. The worst case is these are philosophical zombies, and what that means basically is they are giving every impression that they are aware, but there is nothing really going on behind the scenes. And that may well be what we have here. Just because you're asking emotive questions, the system is going to have a cluster of emotive responses already mapped out to match those requests. So there's not necessarily any emotion going on behind there. It's just a mirroring of your state. And this is what these chatbots generally do quite well. They mirror your vibe. They try and maintain a conversation and stay relevant to the user. But that's not necessarily going to create anything that's actually emotional. But that is it for now. Thank you for joining me. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you also subscribe. But that is it for now. And the only thing I have left to say is Pigwig out.
Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oink, oink, ree, squeal, snort, snort, oinkity, squee. Oink, 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 squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Snort, snuffle, oink, squee, squeal, ree, snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, 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 squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Oink, oinkity, snort, snuffle, snuffle, squee, oinkity, oink, oink, snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, 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 squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree, 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 oh. Squeal, squeal. Snort, snuffle, oink, ree, squeal, ree, snort, oinky, oinkity, oink, 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 snuffle, ree, squee, snort, oink, squeal. Oink, oink, oinkity, squee, squee, ree, 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 snuffle, snort, squeal, squeal, oinky, oink, snort, snort, squee, oink, 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 ree.